I think what we'll do today is a kind of a running introduction of the two of you as we walk through your work and your art and your life in the course of 45 minutes or so, 48 years and 48 years of marriage in 45 minutes. Preparing for this, Nancy Wilhelm sent me a couple of videos from the past conversations, annual conversations with these honorees, and last year's, the woman who interviewed Ron and Jan Greenberg began by saying she's known them so long she feels like family. So we've upped it a notch this year. We actually are family. In journalism, we call that a conflict of interest. But the upside is that I've had a front row seat over nearly 5 decades to the evolution of their life together and their art, as well as the evolution of Charles's hair. It's a shot from the early years. Charles, through my childhood, helped further my own interest in public issues, and Bunny taught art classes to me and my friends when we were kids, and helped me discover that I was not destined for a life in art. But we're not just going to talk about art today. We're going to talk about art and marriage. We're going to talk about art and politics, and if we have time, we are going to talk about the politics of marriage. I asked Charles and Bunny as we were preparing for this for, kind of running themes, and Charles had a very nice way of summarizing it. The theme of art, politics, and activism, plus a magic glue of love and respect, make for a long-lasting marriage.
Wow.
So, let's take everybody through it. I want to talk first. Let's spend a little time on your careers and how you got from there to here. This is Claire, one of their daughters, who's here with Jesse Jackson and Geraldine Ferraro. I think this picture, or one like it, was on the front page. How old were you? 8. So politics runs in the blood, activism runs in the blood, and as you'll see over the course of our session together, it runs through the art. But let me actually start with a question from Kate, the other daughter, which is to Bunny. When did your passion for art begin? Was there a moment when the light went off?
Yes. So my best friend and I decided to take ballet lessons, and we were 6 in the first grade, and I failed. Then I decided I wanted to be an artist. Couldn't be a ballet dancer. I wanted to be an artist, and my mother said, okay. She gave me art lessons in the summers and on Saturdays, and I never stopped. So, yeah, that was it.
And Charles, how did you get interested in politics?
Well, it was in my blood. I was raised in a family that was deeply involved in politics in Memphis, where we grew up, and in Tennessee. And so that's just what I was going to do, politics and public service. That was our conversation at dinner tables, and I got involved in junior high school and high school politics, and won some and lost some, and the winning was a lot better. But I did have some losses, which prepared me for the future.
So you ran, and those of us who at very young ages were co-opted into your campaigns, recall you ran for Tennessee Constitutional Convention delegate,
right?
And won.
And won that, and that's when we adopted the slogan of Burson's the person. And Edward and Bunny and me and the kids all wore the Burson is the person t-shirts.
So skipping some years.
You're going to skip the loss, which was...
Skip the loss. although in preparing for this, I read an article about later, I think written later when you went to Washington, in which your opponent in that race you lost said that he was surprised he won, and how gracious you were, and that it made his victory sweeter that he knew he had beaten somebody so accomplished and ethical. That doesn't happen much in Tennessee
Well,
politics.
actually, it was a tough loss. It was for a county commission race, and when we had a better count operation than he did, and I knew that we had lost by some few hundred votes before he did, and I actually went to his home where he was having his election night party, and went through, and everybody's turning and looking, what's he doing? And I went up to him and I said, "Ed, you've won, and congratulations." And that's what
he never forgot. So if you can't win the vote, get appointed, right? You became Go ahead.
Can I say one thing, because it's a story that really has been a life story for me, and I don't even know that it's true, but so at this Constitutional Convention service, I was gone a lot. It was like a legislator. I was up in Nashville a lot and not home much. And this is how Bunny kind of woke me up to priorities. I came home one weekend, and she said, this is the way I remember it. Bunny and I, over the years, our exact memories of things tend to differ a little, and we're learning to reconcile those differences. But anyway, the way I remember it, she said, "Well, I was giving Claire a bath the other night," and she looked up at me and said, "Mommy, I'm not sure I can remember what Daddy looks like." And that went to the heart, and
it was true.
Kind of really shaped. Kind of, you've got to make these choices, and it began to shape what my career path started to look like for me.
No, it was true. She said it.
She's forgotten. It's all forgotten. Forgiven. You were appointed Attorney General of Tennessee in 1988. 1988. There was a television news story about your predecessor.
I'll tell that one.
You go ahead.
Okay. So he went, he was appointed, and
You've been practicing law, right?
Right.
Practicing law, so he got a call from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and said, "Charles, you want to be Attorney General?" And we had just gotten back from a long trip. He was sort of jet-lagged, and he said, "Well, I need to talk to Bunny about it and, see what she thinks." So we talked about it like at 3 in the morning, and we decided we'd say yes. And the next morning, he went to Nashville. They had a press conference, and I had our 2 daughters, Claire and Kate. We were watching TV, and the person who was resigning, he said he was resigning because he had a son going to college, and, he needed to go back into his law practice so he could afford, college. And they both looked at me, and one of them said, "Are we going to be eating beans?" And the other one said, "Will I ever be able to go to college?" But anyway, we moved to Nashville, and I think it all worked out well, right?
And your art career evolved in Nashville at Vanderbilt, and
It did. I had the best job that I have, almost that I've ever had, because I had an opportunity to, had a friend who was dealing with cancer and chemotherapy, and I decided to work with her on art. And I took that experience that I'd had in Memphis and took it to Nashville, took it to Vanderbilt Hospital, and I had a good 9 years working with patients and families, and even bringing the doctors and into the hospital rooms to play for patients. And it was Nashville being Music City, we had a lot of performers come in. So it really was something that was very, very satisfying. And so even though I wasn't making my own art, I was working as an administrator. It was a very fulfilling experience for me.
And you stayed in that job about 10 years?
About 8 years.
8
yeah,
years.
no, no,
8 years. And finally, this is actually Burson quits. This is the end of the 8 years, and
Yeah.
you decided it was time, I guess, to go back to law practice. But then there was a phone call.
There was a phone call. Well, I decided that I needed to go out and make some money. So when I took this job, it paid $65,000 a year.
The AG.
The AG, yeah. And the one thing I knew is that it was going to be increased at the first of the year or something, but not that much. But really, I mean, this is why Bunny was so supportive of my ambitions and the ambitions for the family, that she made my career possible. We'll get to later. I'm the trailing spouse, but
So you were gonna go back. You were gonna leave.
so
the
I was
AG
going
and
to go
back
back.
to law.
Yeah, so I lost. So I was going to go back to make money. That was the point. I was going to go back, and I had an opportunity not to practice law. I looked at the law practice and was not enamored. But this was with a startup business that in the healthcare field that I was very excited about. And this was really fortuity. The guy was supposed to seal the offer with me on a Friday afternoon. He was going to come over and we were going to do the deal. And he got stuck in a snowstorm in Pittsburgh. This was in the 1st of January. And that afternoon, when I was supposed to be doing my new career in the private sector, I get a call from Al Gore. Now, Al and I had known one another since 1968, and we had worked on his campaigns. But really, I had not, once he became vice president, I had really, as Attorney General in Tennessee, I had to be a little bit more neutral. So we had not been that active in the presidential campaign. At any rate, he says, I want you to come to Washington. I want you to be my general counsel. And my mouth dropped open, and because I thought he was calling for another reason on an issue we had. And so my first response was, I would love to do that, but I can't do this unless Bunny agrees. So I ran Bunny down, and I said, I've got some exciting news for you. But I was a little careful because I just anticipating that private sector job, bought myself a new cashmere overcoat and a cashmere sport coat, and I don't know what I was going to do with that if I took this job. So Bunny and I meet at the Parthenon grounds in Nashville. The wind's blowing, it's winter. We get together like some of the pictures in Deep Throat, this secret thing I couldn't tell anybody. And, we decided, let's go for it. And she had a job that she just really, really loved. And so, it was tough, but she was ready for the adventure. So I'll let you take it from there, because then we left the Parthenon.
Oh, okay. So I'll go back to work. And,
No, before you went to work. That was late.
Gore knew he had to that you were the key, right?
Right. So, Charles had said to him he had to check with me, which was, gosh, he's been saying that. And I was thinking about it. I get home, and Kate has the phone, and she says, Mom, there's somebody on the phone who says he's the vice president. I don't know if he really is or not, but here. So
Crank caller.
yes, crank call. So anyway, it was Al Gore, and he said, Charles says it's up to you. So I said, we'll do it. And the next thing I know, he's loading up the car, driving up to D.C., and, we had a wild ride.
A little unprepared, let's be honest, right?
Well, I was unprepared for Attorney General. When my first day on the job as Attorney General, I looked for the manual, and I asked my assistant, I said, where's the manual on how to be Attorney General? And this was even more daunting. Going to the White House was perhaps the most daunting thing I've ever done in my life.
And on the way up, on the drive up, I guess the kids and Bunny were going to come later. You drove up, and this is just a reversal of usually the nephew is like, hey, no, can I stay on your couch? But Charles calls me up. I'm driving to Washington. Edward, can I sleep on your couch? I lived in Washington, and was at the Wall Street Journal's Washington bureau, and you came, stayed with me before you could move into your place.
And unbeknownst to Edward, because I kept this very tight, the next morning we're having breakfast. And he's talking to me about Al Hunt. Now, for those of you who remember, Al Hunt was a big figure with the Journal, with the Wall Street Journal then. I think maybe he was the editor, but he
Bureau chief, all over television. Yeah.
But a real force. But, quite truthfully, I'm thinking, who? And then I realized as he tells me who Al Hunt is, I said, oh my God, am I unprepared for this? I don't even know Al Hunt. So.
But you figured it out. You became chief of staff. And Bunny, you moved up, and talk about what you did in Washington in the arts.
So I had a couple of great jobs. First, I worked with the arts at the Department of Veterans Affairs, which included bringing disabled veterans to Crested Butte and Snowmass to learn to ski. I didn't know how to ski, but they did. And these were very, very severely disabled veterans. And so I worked with them in the arts, but I was so inspired by what they did physically, on these slopes. And then I had a great opportunity. I don't know how much you want me to tell about this, but I was the director of the President's Committee. Okay. I was the director of the President's Committee on the Arts and the Humanities, which was an incredible platform from which to make things happen. I had always worked on the local level or the state level, but this was the national level. And just a quick story, we were asked by the Dance Theater of Harlem to help to raise money to take their dance floor over to China for an international festival. And so, when you call up and you say you're the director of the President's Committee, you sort of have a leg up on that. We were able to raise the money. We were able to send the whole troop over to China. And I know we're not yet to the next phase, but when we ended up having to leave Washington, when they kind of turned the lights out on us, we got to St. Louis, and I met some people right at the beginning, and the Center of Creative Arts had invited me over, and they introduced me to a tall, lanky African-American dancer, and when he heard what I had done, he said, well, I had the most incredible experience of my life. I went to China with the Dance Theater of Harlem, and his story is amazing. He ended up becoming a principal dancer for Alvin Ailey. He has had an incredible career, and he's now back living in St. Louis and teaching and directing the program there. So he came from the projects in St. Louis, and now he is moving and shaking there. So that was great.
We're going to get in a minute to transitions and important transitions that really were key to what you both did in the arts subsequently. But before that, a question I meant to ask at the outset of this chronology, which is how many times have you moved?
Oh, God.
You would think that we would be professional movers because I think we're on number 15. And that's, and most of it was without help. I mean, it was, moving, in the nonprofit sector or public service, so you didn't really have a budget. So we did a lot of it ourselves, and believe it or not, we didn't leave anything behind. We kept taking everything with us.
Including a lot of art, right? There was a time I remember going to your house for some family meal. You had just moved in. There was art everywhere.
And you said to me, Aunt Bunny, how come you have all this art and you don't have any furniture? He said, we don't even have a couch to sit on. So, yeah.
So skipping ahead a few years to some pivotal moments in your lives and in the lives of the country. Charles, what are we looking at here?
So I'm going to share a little secret with you that I've not shared with anyone, but this was a very sober day. This was the day, January 6th, 2001, when Al Gore was having to count the votes that made George Bush president. And this was one of the few kind of protest that it wasn't really a protest, but objections that was being made, but it was really not going to go anywhere. But anyway, suddenly in the middle of the count, Al motions for me to come up to the podium, and he whispers this great state secret to me. He says, "Tell Tipper we're going to be late." So my job, which often was the chief of staff's job, was to give a call to Tipper to tell her we're going to be late. But I think the photograph says more than that, doesn't it?
This is the first I've heard of that. I thought it was something really, really important.
But levity aside, this was a pretty crushing.
It's a pretty crushing moment, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was so sad to watch him up there having to go through this. But, he was graceful and showed tremendous strength in going through it. That morning, it started out with his giving Cheney a tour of the Naval Observatory, the vice president. So it was a really, really tough day for him.
So just piling on the grief here. Tell us
Another loss.
We'll get back to where you went after 2000, but just on I want to kind of get at how these experiences shaped where you both went after them.
Yeah, I'll kind of go through this very quickly, but this was part of a project that I was doing with the Advanced Mentor Program, working on a book following Hillary's campaign. And started out, Bunny and I did, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She was very much a part of this, although she was campaigning and I was the objective, neutral photojournalist, supposedly. And this picture was taken election night in the Javits Center.
It's your photo.
Yes, this is my photo. I took that as the networks were announcing Florida going for Trump, and it was that moment, and that's the name of the photograph, that moment when the realization was that Trump was going to win, Hillary was going to lose. And that was a searing evening for Bunny and I, because it brought back not only mainly because of Hillary's loss and Trump's, but it also brought back so many memories of Al's loss back to Bush.
So skipping backward a bit to 2001, you leave Washington after the Gore loss. It's a real transitional moment for your art, for your profession, and really for the marriage. And who's trailing whom? You want to talk about that, Charles?
Well, a little bit, but I'll let Bunny talk about it too. But it was, the silver lining was that I was finally pursuing our economic interests. And so I was going corporate, and I had negotiated a really good package. Bunny really, for the first time, was not having to do something to help support us. And it was her choice what to do with her life and her career. And what she did for where she was coming from, not having been a practicing artist for 20-something years or more, what she did was very courageous, and it began her career as a practicing artist. So what did you do?
So I researched St. Louis, which is where we were headed, and I found out that Washington University had one of the best printmaking departments in the country. And I'd been a printmaking, had a B.F.A., and then I just had started my M.F.A. and before we started moving. And I just walked into the admissions office and I said, well, I'm here. Want to get my M.F.A., and I've got, I guess I just need one more year. And they said, but that was 25 years ago. They said, you got to put a portfolio together. You got to, you're not in automatically or anything. So I got my portfolio together, and our two kids kept saying, "Mom, have you, completed your application? It's due in 2 weeks," and that kind of thing. Talk about a role reversal. So anyway, I applied, and I got in, and I was the only 53-year-old who was starting all over again. So I was in this grad program with all the 20-somethings, and it was really hard. It was hard to get back into it. It was hard to, go to those critiques. I loved the 20-somethings, and they were always including me in things like going to wrestling matches on Saturday nights. And Charles kept saying, "Nope, I'm drawing the line there. I'm not doing that." But anyway, I really, really worked hard, and I got to know my fellow artists really well. I realized that they had no idea about government, how government affected them, how it could be a positive force for them. They weren't registered to vote. They weren't getting ready. We had an election coming up. This was 2004. So I got them all registered, took them to the polls. They didn't know what had hit them. But anyway, that was what my artwork was all about. And, I think that election of 2000 had such an effect on me and made me realize how important it is to, not just for me, but for me to get out there and let other people know the importance of our vote and to protect our rights and all of that. So my work was all, I decided, are you
Before
next?
we'll get
No?
to that.
Okay.
1 second. I want to get to that. But because it's around the same period you started coming out here.
Right. Well, then we could have, because Charles was, doing he was out of public service at this point. We could afford to come to Snowmass. And so actually, are you talking about my mom, bringing my
Go,
mom out?
if you like.
So
Sure.
every week, every year, I would bring my mom somewhere for a week. And Charles said, "Well, they love, your mother loves music, and you do. And so, why don't you bring her out to Aspen?" So I did, and we'd been here in the winter before, but we'd never been here in the summer. And we went to the music festival. We ran into friends, and they invited us for dinner. And I called Charles up, and I said, "You know what? Now that you're doing so well," I said, "we ought to buy a house out here." And he said, "We've never talked about a second home. What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, just come on out. Just come on out. You'll see." So Labor Day, I had already arranged for a real estate agent.
Yeah.
And this is not what I usually do, but I was so taken with this. And I had never been to Anderson Ranch. I knew about it from a good friend. And I said, "Charles, we gotta live near Anderson Ranch." And he didn't really know what that was all about. But we ended up buying a house 10 minutes away, walking. And now he agrees that was the right thing to do, right?
Yeah, I must admit, we did kind of dip our toes in the looking in Aspen, and I decided I wasn't doing that well. So,
But you got there.
yeah.
I'm skipping around a bit, but to get back to the work you did here and in St. Louis during this period, you recently gave the graduation speech at the Memphis Academy of Arts where you got your B.F.A., right? And I pulled a line out of that speech to the graduates in this May, right? Where you said, you may not, it's about the need as artists to engage in the world around you. And you said, "You may not think that's your role as an artist, but I believe that it is that we as artists should improve the lives of those around us and the world we inhabit." A big theme of the weekend with Ai Weiwei here, but let's talk about Burson, not Ai Weiwei. What is this?
So the first body of work I did was with Chad. You all remember Chad from the 2000 election. So I collected boxes and boxes and bags of Chad. And
From Florida or from all over?
Florida, West Coast, East Coast, Missouri, wherever. I called election commissions all over the country. I went on eBay and got a voting booth. It was full of Chad, so I've still got it. So much Chad, I don't know what to do with the rest of it. So I started making art with it, and my faculty kept saying, you don't really need to hit people over the head with what you want to say. You need to bring them in to the aesthetics of something. And so I used the Chad as sort of the sea foam, and this was harking back to Hokusai's Great Waves. So this was the storm over Florida. So the whole body of work had to do with storms, and because this was a storm. Hurricanes, tornadoes, big waves, and then embedded in this paper, which is handmade, are the heads of the cast of characters from the 2000 election. So I've got everybody. I've got the good guys, and I've got the not so good guys and gals from Florida. People who had something to do with what happened with the vote count and the Supreme Court taking the case and George W. Bush becoming president. So I worked on that. I worked on this body of work for about 8 years until 2008. And then I switched to something else because I felt like I had done what I wanted to do. Not that I had anything to do with Obama winning the election, but I felt like I'd played a little role.
So, same theme, different era. This is part of the work you did after the 2016 election.
So 2016, as Charles showed you photographically, we were shocked. We were devastated by what happened on election night 2016. And the next day, as we were getting ready to leave New York, Kate called and said that a friend of hers, who's a journalist, had just gotten something over the wire that they were boxing up all the confetti that didn't fall that night, that had been loaded into the air cannons. So I thought, need to find that confetti. And I started, and it took me a couple of weeks. I called everybody I could think of within the campaign, people in development and marketing, and all the people we had met along the way. And some people thought it had been destroyed. Some people thought it was, nobody knew really where it was. So I started making phone calls, and finally I found somebody who said, yes, I have it. I said, how much do you have? And he said, 200 pounds. So that is a lot of confetti. So I said, well, I'd like to buy it. Sort of felt like I'd already bought it, but I'll buy it again. And so it ended up on my doorstep in St. Louis, boxes and boxes and boxes and black plastic bags. And you could tell had been loaded into the air cannons because it wasn't pristine. It was.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, I didn't have any idea what I would do with it. But I decided I wanted to see how it would feel if that confetti had actually fallen on us on election night. So this was a big installation in the window of my gallery in St. Louis. And it's 5 feet by 5 feet by 3 feet. And a generator was blowing the confetti 24/7, so you could see it. You didn't have to go into the gallery. You could do a drive-by. And it was lit beautifully. Those are Maya Angelou's words, and Still I Rise. There's a mirror in the back. You can sort of see me back there. So you walk in the daytime or at night, you see yourself, and the confetti is falling down on you. So people had said, oh, it's so sad. How could you have done that? But I look at it a different way, and I think most people, when they saw it and read the piece about it, that it really is to inspire us to, when something bad happens, to pick yourself up and keep going and be inspired by the future, always thinking about going forward. And I felt really good about the response to it. However, there was a lot of social media, and I got a lot of negative response too. In fact, somebody who wrote for the Cecil County, Maryland.
I have the quote here.
Oh,
if you'd
you
like
do?
me to read
Oh,
it. But that was about this, really, wasn't it?
that was about this. Yeah, the snow globes got the most social media.
So this
Yeah.
is what?
So this is also the confetti that was supposed to fall, chopped up in smaller pieces. Again, there's a mirror with Maya Angelou's words. And this is an edition. I made 1,000 of them. All the proceeds go to Planned Parenthood. And I talked about it, and I talked about inspiring little girls and young women, and I just went on, I was just totally dedicated to spreading the word about these snow globes. And a former student of Charles's is in the marketing and communications business, so I hired him to do the social media, because I can't take any credit for doing that, but he got it really out there. And I got a lot of response.
So this is a small paper in a town in rural Maryland, and it's a columnist who says, some loopy left-wing artist named Bunny Burson tracked down 200 pounds of the unused confetti and turned it into an art exhibit. First, what respectable adult goes around with a goofy name like Bunny? I mean, come on.
My mother loved that.
We all loved it.
Is the confetti any left?
Oh, lots. I've
Still
got lots left.
And Chad's?
Chad, lots left.
Where is the confetti and where are the Chads?
In storage in Carbondale.
Okay. All right. So, skipping ahead a little, you retired from the corporate world, and I'm going to quote Kate here. Kate said, Mom has managed to do the impossible. After almost 50 years of marriage, she managed to bring out the artist in her husband. So what happened to you?
Perfect timing, Edward. I don't know. So I retired, and I kind of retired, and I started teaching at Washington University. Taught law there at the law school for almost 7 years. Coming out here, and really this place was one of the inspirations for total retirement, at least from that world, because I wanted to be here in the fall, and I couldn't teach and be out here in the fall, which to me is the most beautiful season. So I had as a practicing lawyer, and where I was corporate and where I was in the White House, I was basically a crisis manager. That was my thing, and I had had enough stress. But I had also that career, I was really, really happy with it and fortunate. That career was behind me. And I remembered in college, actually, I had toyed with being a writer and actually a poet. But I had made the other decision. And I decided, is there anything left on the right side of my brain? And that I wanted to develop my more creative self and chase Bunny as an artist. I wasn't sure how this is going to work with two artists, but and we'll tell you a little bit tonight about how that ultimately came about. But I was not the bravest soul in pursuing this, and had to have a little push from Bunny. But I ended up at Anderson Ranch. Is Andrea here? I don't know if Andrea's here, but Andrea Wallace was my great mentor and inspiration here in photography. I decided that was going to be my vehicle, my creative vehicle. And so it's kind of gone from there. But that is the last photograph I took and Edward will show a cover here in a minute, in my project for the Advanced Mental Studies, which is becoming a book to be released in October. And this was taken at actually, it's part of my afterward. This was the Women's March in New York. And she just happened, it was one of those moments. I'm following her because I thought, I was watching her and she was with a friend, and kind of interesting. It was windy out. And, I've got my camera up and I'm following her, but I'm not up. And all of a sudden this big gust of wind comes and just literally blows her around with that thing. Got that photograph.
So I'm going to skip. See if we have time, we'll come back to this. But let's. So these are the dueling Burson books, right?
Yeah, there's a big difference between them, which Edward, I'm sure, will touch on. But that's the draft of the cover of front cover of the book that'll be released in October, published by Lucia Marcon. It's called The Ground Game, and it's a photojournal, my own personal narrative of the campaign, of the 2016 presidential campaign, interspersed with memoir stories of our experiences over the years in politics.
And Bunny, a lot of the work that went into your book was happening all through the period in St. Louis as you were
Right.
doing the more political work, but this is a really personal story, really, for both of us.
Right. So my mother, Edward's grandmother, came as a teenager from Germany in 1938, and really never wanted to talk about it, never mentioned anything about her family, and it was a secret for many, many years until 2009. She was 90, and I had we were moving her, and I found a bundle of about 100 letters written to her and her brother from her parents. First, they were in Germany where they lived, and then they went to Latvia. So we had a stack of all these letters. Claire had sort of opened the door by, talking to my mother. She, as the next generation, she was much more successful. I never felt permission to do that. And so when I had the letters translated back in St. Louis, thanks to Sabina, who's here today, I found out about myself through finding out about my grandparents and my mother. So I decided that this is what I wanted to work on. And thanks to Washington University, I had an artist residency in Paris, 2 months to work on on these letters. And when I came back, it took me a couple of years, had a show and worked, through all these letters, and my mother still was not really on board, but she was okay about my having the show. She kept saying, why would, the red dots went up, on the work, and she'd say, why would anyone want to buy this? So, I ended up, thanks to another curator in St. Louis, decided to work on a book. And this is the culmination of those years, plus another 4 years. And again, my mother was not real happy with me about it. But once the Library of Congress acquired a book, she was better. She thought that was all right. She said, that's America's library. So
Some other places.
and other
really.
places as well. Has been very, very well received, and there were, it's an artist book, limited edition. There are only 27 books.
It's at Yale. It's just I know.
Stanford at the Perez Miami Art Museum, the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, Smith College, Washington University's library, St. Louis Art Museum,
Whitney.
the Whitney. Thank you. You're my agent. Yeah. So anyway, I felt really good about it, but nothing made me feel better than last summer. In June, the museum in Memphis acquired a book, and it was on display, and that was the last thing my mother was able to do. We took her to see the book installed. And on the way home, she said, you know how upset I was with you for doing this? And I said, yes. And she said, well, now I'm glad you did. So that made me feel...
It should be said, she was a remarkable person who was exercising just about into her 98th year. And in fact, the move you described where you found the letters, there was some discussion she might go to assisted living, but she wanted to go to assisted living because their exercise class was only a half an hour and she wanted an hour. So she was really a force, an amazing force of nature.
We were
Died
lucky.
a year ago today, in fact, so it's special for all of us to be together talking about this. How are we doing on time?
I think we're about ready for questions.
All right, well, before we go to questions, I want to read something. I asked each of your daughters to say something about you.
Whoa.
Who can bring this to a close better than I can. Claire said, "Through your shared passions for art and politics and country, you have taught me the importance and necessity of self-expression, using one's voice to help create meaning in the world." And Kate said, "Art was the channel through which," this is really about you, Bunny. She said, "Art was the channel through which she navigated the world. Wherever we moved, whatever age or stage of development Claire, Dad, or I faced, she provided us perspective, inspiration, and counsel through art. Even when she took me to tennis tournaments, she would make sure we visited the local art museum. I learned that art wasn't just something to be observed, but a way to explore and process the world past, present, and future, even for those of us who weren't blessed with artistic abilities. We are all part of that chain of values passed through generations. It didn't start with you, and it won't end with you."
Oh. Oh, that's beautiful.
Questions?
No questions.
Could you share with us, I understand how intimate it is, but could you share with us what the revelation in your grandmother's letters were, your mother's letters were?
Oh. They were a combination of, well, I want to say one thing. First, all of the letters, they were chronological, so 38, 39 to 41. And they were all from her parents until the last letter, which was from my mother, typed at work, August of 41, and sent to Latvia, and it was returned. So that's how she knew, what had happened. So the beginning letters were all kind of everyday kinds of things, getting adjusted to a new place and what life was like, how it was changed, and trying to get in touch with the consul in all different kinds of places to get a visa, and telling her where everything was, where, kind of outlining where her worldly possessions were, where their money was, the relatives who were in Riga. Then it got to be pretty, they were becoming aware that that they weren't going to be able to get out. I mean, they were trying to get out all kinds of ways, even to Shanghai. They were trying to.
So I gather this was a Jewish family?
Right. So my grandmother had her papers. My grandfather didn't. So one letter was all about how he wished he had the courage.
Your mother. Your
Oh,
mother.
My mother.
Your mother.
Excuse me.
Your mother had her.
No.
I'm sorry.
No, my grandmother. Your great-grandmother.
Ignore me.
She had the papers. He didn't have the papers to get out. And that he wished that he'd had the courage to let her go by herself, but now it was too late. So it just kept getting more and more dire, more and more fatalistic. She said, all I want is to be reunited with my children, and it looks like it's not going to happen, but we have to accept that because, just like heaven has two sides, we have the same things that are happening in our life, and she was asking about how they were doing and, what life was like, and so my mother's last letter to them was, she's, talked about how wonderful this country is and how she wished that they could share in the wonders of what she was experiencing and how much she loved them, and she just wished she could hear that they were okay. So it was a pretty emotional journey for me to do all of this, but I'm so glad that I did because I have this, and I was just asked to do a video of the book. And thanks to two videographers in Charles's Advanced Mentored Studies class, they came and videotaped it, and it's going to be shown this fall in an exhibition in St. Louis for the Four Freedoms 50-state initiative. So I'm just glad that it's living on, and I think there's so many stories out there. Everybody really has a story. But I'm glad that I was finally able to share ours. Thank you for asking.
Another personal question. How did you meet?
Well, you remember right at the beginning of this, I said that we share so many common stories, but as the years pass, the details tend to be a little different, and we tend to reconcile them. We were both in Memphis, and I was 4 years older than Bunny, so I mean, growing up, I never met her, didn't know anything about it. She didn't know anything about me. And we really met when she was in high school and I was in college. And a friend of mine took her out on a date, and I double dated with him, and I had my girlfriend with him. And I just kind of said, she was too young. I mean, she was like a junior and I was a sophomore or something like that, a rising junior. And I said, I'm going to keep her in mind, you know. She's cute. And
I grew up.
she grew up. So there are a couple of little other stories, but the main one is that I had been in school in England for 2 years, and Robbie Kissin, who's a great friend from there, and Leslie, know that I had an English gal that I was dating and very serious with, and I was coming home from law school and got a telegram that relationship was over with. And instead of being in London, I was in Memphis, and that was a shock. But I wanted, a friend of mine said, let's go out. You need to get over this. Let's go out and have a date. And the day before that happened, Bunny has this spread in the local newspaper with her that she had just finished her junior year in France, and she had this party where she cooked this pomme tarte. And I thought, well, that's that little high school kid. She's grown up, you know, not as she's good looking, and she's cooked, and she's had a year of France under her belt. So I called her up and asked her out. Now, I didn't know it, but her boyfriend was visiting. So she couldn't go out with me the night I asked, but I was persistent. And we had our first date, and were married in less than a year after that.
I was the ring bearer. Go ahead. One here, one there.
So you guys have a unique combination of art, government, and education to share, and some of us have realized and seen that America has lost its way as regards art education, particularly in the public schools, and I wondered if you had some recipes or observations about that as to what can turn that around and make it happen again.
Yeah, I will tell you, I'm not optimistic for the near future. So there's so many things that and so many great minds that have been applied to this, and resources, and we haven't found the answer, at least as far as the public. There are niches, and there are certainly places of privilege, both in terms of talent and wealth, that provide great opportunities here. But, you know, and I hate to be pessimistic, but we've been talking about this since we were in our 20s. How are we going to turn around the education system? And we haven't done it. If anything, it's probably gotten, it's public education system. If anything, it's probably gotten worse. So I think we just need to keep working on the pockets. We just need to keep working on those individual success stories that we can create and that most of y'all here probably have experienced. But as a nation, I'm not optimistic on that. You know, our kids aren't going to, Claire and Kate are going to be talking and struggling with this as their kids grow older. You know, so that's where I am.
That's not where I am.
So
I'm very optimistic because I look at young people today. I know some of these young people who have been in Teach for America and who are working now administratively, trying to, and I feel like we've got foundations who are supportive of these young people, and I'm ready to pass the baton to them. And I think that they're going to do a better job than we have with education and in so many other areas. I really do feel positive. But we argue about this all the time.
Over here. There's one over here.
Thank you so much for such an incredibly human conversation and sharing yourselves in such an authentic way with us. I was really moved by your exhibition this winter at Anderson Ranch Gallery here. Can you talk about the process of your collaboration in putting together that exhibition?
Let me go first on that, because this was Bunny's exhibition. And, you know, you talk like being a kid, you know, and she invited me when, you know, I had my pictures, my photographs done, and she invited me to participate in her exhibition. And it would be our exhibition. And I leapt at it. And then we did. We really did collaborate in terms of, and both of us pitched in and helped one another in how it would be exhibited, how my photographs be exhibited, the creation of her video, and then how her individual works would be shown. So it really did become a collaboration. But boy, I mean, what kind of break is that? You do your first real body of photography, and you get an exhibition with an established great artist. So.
He is being so nice. I just want to say that we talked about the size of his photographs because he wanted them to be huge. And I said, no, we're going to tone it down a little bit. And then he said, well, I want to have 4 in there, not just 3. And I said, well, I don't know about that. And I think he just had 3, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take what you get.
But thank you for your comments on the exhibit.
There's one more, I guess.
Thank you so much for a wonderful interview and presentation. It's been great getting to know you better. What is the one question we haven't asked that you would like to share with us?
Well, what we have slides left of our art, some of our art collection, and some of the agreement and disagreement that we've had.
I'll just do one because we're probably running out of time. Yeah. Okay, so we had just come to the ranch and, just moved here. And we came to the auction in August, and we looked at the artwork before, and, we usually try to both like what we're going to bid on. And I found something I really liked. It was Roxy Payne's Skumac. And so,
I was not as keen on it.
And he said, no, we're not gonna bid on that.
Which one is it?
It's the red blob, yeah. So anyway, I said, well, I really do like it. And he said, I really don't. So the bidding starts, and I don't know anybody in the audience. It turns out I was sitting next to someone with really, really deep pockets, but I didn't know it. So the bidding starts. There are 2 people bidding, and it was going up. And then I thought, well, probably subconsciously I really wanted it, but I thought, well, I'll just bid it up for the ranch. So I was bidding it up, and Charles was looking at me like, what in the world is she doing? So finally, back and forth between, these 2 and 3 of us. And then finally he leans over and says what I thought was, go for it.
That's not what I said. So let me just say that while she's bidding this thing up, there's several people in the bidding. And then it gets down, and this gentleman, and I don't know, he had bought something earlier, and he outbid everybody.
Oh, I remember. It was dinner in Los Angeles for like a dozen people with a big movie star.
So, I didn't feel she could bid with this guy. And besides that, I didn't want the piece. So I leaned over to her, and it was just the 2 of them then. And I said, let it go.
So I got it.
No. What did you think I said?
I said, yeah, go for it. I went
She
for it.
thought
I got
said,
it.
go for it.
And so then the man turned to me and he said, your husband is really upset. And I said, yeah. He says, well, if you want, I'll buy it from you. So I didn't want him to buy it from me. And, by this time we had quite a story that we could tell now. So it's sitting on our back porch. And
So I said, "Let's keep it. Let's
our
go."
neighbors don't like it. But I love it still. So,
So thanks for the question.
thank you. Thank you all for coming.